What's up, guys? So today we're going to dive into supplemental feed. If you follow our channel, you've seen our pictures, you've seen our content. We do a lot of supplemental feed. Some history, for me at least. I was introduced to supplemental feeding, giving deer protein pellets, whatever you want to call it. I actually learned about this back in the 80s when I was a child. The neighboring farm, we had a little lease, and the farm next to us was this behemoth land property that was owned, managed, and was one of like the OG study sites for Dr. Kroll. Literally met Dr. Kroll when I was very young. Super cool, but he had studied and was very big and strong proponent at the time on supplemental feed, protein. I didn't know what that was. And so he had all these feed stations across this mega farm, and I got to see it. It was really cool, and I got to see some of the impacts because it was free range. Deer could come across so we had big deer that came from their farm onto our land. And so I got to see some of the benefits that this offered, and it quickly became something that we incorporated when we could over that time period. So again, been doing it a long time. I've seen the results over a long period of time, but there's definitely some considerations to go through. And so we're going to bang these out and then kind of give a narration on how we're going to go through to really understand what this does for your land and for your deer population. These are studies done by state agencies and or college universities. This is factual data that have done this. Texas, Wyoming, I think I have it all written down. But yes, these are legit studies that we've done. So with supplemental feeding over a 5-year period, you're going to see big increases in antler size. 2 studies showed 17 inches, 20 inches. Another study showed that it was a 48% increases in yearlings with forked antlers. So again, antler development accelerated. Yearlings already showing forked antlers, no spikes, no button bucks. 48% first set of antlers, already forked antlers. 6, 4, 8 pointers coming out of the gate. Over a 5-year period, those bucks are showing quid pro quo. I don't know what the right word is. Same study. Deer that were fed protein versus deer that were not fed the supplement, you saw increases in 17 inches and 20 inches, 2 different studies. Fawn recruitment, fawn crop, however you want to call it, that went from 30% to 70%. Huge jump there. Deer lived longer, and deer showed to be healthier. So, sounds awesome. What are the negatives of it? I think there's a lot, to be honest with you. Deer disease, especially with CWD becoming more and more prevalent. You are taking deer and you are congregating them at a feeder. And with supplemental feed, it's not like corn. You can spread it, but the pellets are not like corn. They're going to dissolve. And so the most applicable way to distribute this is in a trough. You're congregating deer. They're going to be eating out of a trough or some sort of gravity feeder. That's going to spread disease. If you have CWD in your herd, this is going to accelerate that. Don't recommend it, but again, something to consider. Habitat impact is another area that you need to consider. Deer like to be spread out. They're not social animals. And so when you have a high quality food source, they're going to go to it. And so you're going to take a habitat, a bunch of deer, they're going to gravitate to these food sources. Think of a campsite. Campsites get destroyed because lots of people are hanging out there. No different. You got a feed station with a bunch of deer coming and going. They're not going to go far. They're going to hang out as close as can. That area is going to get destroyed, and that's a risk. Ultimately, the final thing that I like to throw out there, big consideration, it's expensive. If you're feeding deer with protein, this is something that has to be done almost year round. And if you're not allowed to, that's an impact. But again, must be consistent, must be done year round, because deer are like animals. They're very sensitive. You just can't all of a sudden introduce something new into their diet and then take it away. So like in Tennessee, our struggle is deer feeding is allowed in the non-hunting months. 30 days prior, you have to remove all feed from all areas. They cannot be present 30 days prior to hunting season. So our deer here, if they are eating supplemental feed, that gets removed from their diet. That is not ideal. They naturally become accustomed to eating this. It becomes part of their diet. you're restricting that, and then they're having to go find 20% of their diet. The minute the season gets close, they have to go find other food sources to make up for that. And so it's just, you have a dog, feed it one type of thing, consistently change up their diet, you're going to have stomach issues, guaranteed. Again, not ideal, and something to consider when you're incorporating into your population. The cost of it, it's expensive. It's something that you're going to have to maintain year-round, weekly, bi-weekly process. The feed gets destroyed in the rain. You got to shovel it out. You got to maintain the feeders. You got to clean them. It is a huge investment, money-wise, time-wise, energy-wise. But what does that all mean? That's where I think the rubber meets the road is the right word to say. Because lots of people do it. It's effective. If you look at some of the freak shows that are growing on deer farms, they're not feeding them browse. They are feeding them high quality protein and creating freak shows. Why? Because it works. And so how can you show that it works over time? Well, we took and modeled all the data that these studies have reviewed. Like, let's get into the real, like, what does that mean? What does 17 inches increases? What is the fawn recruitment rate going from 30 to 70%? Like, these data points that give you kind of trajectory models, like, let's model this out and see how that really affects you. Because that to me is like, whoa. Because it is, like I said, big upfront costs, time consumption. It's tricky. It's hard. Why do people do it? And you hear these stats thrown out there and it doesn't really make sense. But when you really start modeling it out, it becomes like, whoa. So we modeled this out. And in our model, we looked at it as from the perspective of, all right, have a deer population and they live here. They've never been fed deer feed. Average body weight, 200 pounds for a buck. And then we then looked at it with these stats that they've given us. How can we model that into a population when you consider natural mortality by age, when you consider hunting mortality rates by age? How does that affect the overarching population of the deer when they're getting consistent food with protein or without protein? How does that look? And with our population modeling, we got some pretty wild stats. So over 5 years, if you consistently maintain this, you're going to go from 98 deer to 228 deer. So again, this is taking a natural population of deer that started off with 42 bucks living on this land. I think the model was 1,000 acres, or 2,000 acres. Took a chunk of land, and we then said, all right, here's our starting baseline, and we modeled it over that 5-year period with protein feed. When you factor in the 70% fawn crop rate, or the 2.5x increase in fawn recruitment rate, when you factor in the increased antler size, when you factor in the longer lifespans of deer reaching full maturity, these are the outcomes you're going to see. Obviously, these are relative, but again, you go from having 98 bucks to 228 bucks. That is just that net change, relative change, 2.5x is huge. Mature bucks 5.5 and older, the model would suggest that you go from 32 bucks to 77 bucks. And so, like, these are ginormous number increases that when you have a healthy herd, they're going to produce bigger antlers. They're going to increase body weight. Body weight in this model suggests that it would go from a 200-pound average weight to a 250-pound average weight. You're taking a population and just like giving it new life, much like you do any other animal that you feed on a routine basis. Is that what you want to do or not do? That's really up to you. But it is something that should be considered. I like to say it's in your arsenal. If you have the means to do it, this is why people are doing it. If you don't have the means to do it, it's not the end of the world. I like to always look at like the pros and cons of it. One feed site say you're feeding 100 pounds every 1 to 2 weeks of deer. That's a high density of deer in that area. That is about the equivalent of 1 acre food plot. So if you live in an area that doesn't lend itself to food plots, your heavy timber, introducing supplemental feed could and would increase the food consumption available in that area. That would be an area where you'd see a big spike. Imagine a food plot that doesn't exist, now is in the form of supplemental feed. So again, if you have tons of food plot availability to increase, like, you don't have to go the route. You can go the browse route, and 5 acres of food plots would yield 5 feed stations. Like, that is, so you can begin to see like how food plots and supplemental feed complement each other. But if you don't have the means and you want to go the food supplemental route, that is what you're going to see. So again, net results you're going to see based on studies and modeling those studies, you're going to see huge outcome changes over a 5-year period. Again, that's 5 years of energy that you got to put into this. It's a 5-year investment, but people have shown that this is the average. You could get way above that, you could get below that, but that's the average. Some do's and don'ts: got to use high quality feed. You can't use cow feed. You got to do something that's specifically formulated for deer. You obviously have to distribute feeders evenly, or else you're just gonna, you have everything congregated like in one area. It's just not gonna work. Monitor the deer health. Like, can't stress that enough. Like, don't beat a dead horse. If the deer aren't eating it, take that into consideration. If deer are over consuming it, like if you see deer just eating a ton of your feed, put cameras out, assess it. Deer are looking unhealthy, use that to your advantage. Understand that, like, don't introduce something that's going to cause disastrous results, like accelerate the spread of CWD and whatnot, diseases in your area. Rotating your feeding site, because like I said, I like to use the camping site analogy. Every feed area is going to be like a camping site. That area is going to get destroyed. I recommend moving feed sites around so that you can evenly reach new deer and or not destroy one area really serious, because the amount of browse is going to be consumed in that area. Amount of feed, deer, Harvest management. If you go down this path really seriously, I would highly recommend getting a harvest plan in place. Begin. You can't just blow up the deer population. You feed them, they're going to blow up. The population is going to increase. With larger populations, you're going to have to harvest more deer. Have a harvest plan in place. Make sure you're not just destroying the habitat, and eventually you're going to hit the wall where deer just collapse because the habitat can't support it and everything just starts dying off. Don't hunt over the feed stations. You want the deer to feel safe there. Hunt far, far away. Do not hunt over them. Don't overfeed. When deer are consuming more than 1 to 2 pounds of feed per day, they're becoming over-reliant on the deer feed. You want to be, it's called supplemental feeding. It's not called dominant feeding. It's supposed to supplement their current diet. You want them 1 to 2 pounds a day and 6 to 8 pounds of natural browse. If they start turning more into cattle, that's a whole nother dilemma. And I would probably stop supplemental feeding at that point. And then finally, don't ignore local regulations. Tennessee has specifics on this, especially in CWD areas. Always follow, talk to your local DNR people, find out the rules and regs in your area, because this is heavily regulated, and to consider for your deer herd. So I've done, again, I indicated in the very early on, we've done supplemental feeding for a long time. I've done it in Georgia, I've done it in Alabama, I've done it now in Tennessee. And Tennessee's actually been the more tricky areas because we have more restrictions here that we have to follow. But if you want to go down the food supplement route, I've been using 4S Wildlife Solutions out of Georgia for a very long time. Good group. They have a lot of information. You can pull all that off their website. They have a great product, and we've been very successful with that. We've seen great outcomes out of it. And we've done it in Georgia, in Alabama, and in Tennessee. And so in 4 different, vastly different ecological settings. And so it's just the time commitment. It's a resource commitment that we've seen huge improvements, and something that we just think is important to keep the deer healthy. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'm not going to give into the nuances, because I think you need to get a biologist on a lot of these types of matters. It is very important to get the right, boots on the ground, assessing your habitat to determine if this is the right solution for you. You're going to see a lot of marketing out there selling all these different things that can help you. I would take it all with a grain of salt. But the overarching theme here is high quality feed given to deer in a healthy manner is going to help your deer population if they are at the right point, right set. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Always available. And stay frosty, guys.